Hello, I am Yash Nahar, and I am here to present an overview of my project for the Dynamic Modeling and Forecasting in Big Data course at Harvard in fall 2022. The topic is Time Series Analysis of World Development Indicators. So, just to give a brief background, World Development Indicators is the World Bank's premier compilation of international statistics on global development. It ranges a variety of topics: social, regional, demographic, poverty, health, trade, international trade, etc. And a lot of these indicators are part of the SDG, the Sustainability Development Goals, which is what makes them very important. And it's a rich data set for multiple countries, roughly 217 economies, 1,600 indicators, and the time frame is more than 50 years, so making it a qualitatively and quantitatively rich data set. So with this data set chosen, I aim to do the various modeling, statistical, and data analysis techniques learned in class. Of course, I won't be able to touch upon everything, but trying to see some very significant models. I have applied some filtering on the data set. It's roughly 6 MB. Having filtered the data set, the magnitude is so large, it is not possible to use the entire set as it is for all models. So I have chosen to analyze a two subset of countries, the G20 and the Quad Alliance. G20, again, diverse set of countries and major contribution, roughly 80% of the world GDP. And Quad is a strategic alliance between India, USA, Australia, and Japan. So these two subsets will help understand strong correlation between the world development indicators and how it changes for country-specific requirements. Of course, I did some cleanup. The NAs were dropped wherever large NAs were seen for some years or for some variables. And then after that, if still some NAs were left, I filled them with the mean, which is standard technique for null filling, vertical transformation to get it in the right shape and form. And then all of that data set was saved after pruning. A lot of variables were available, but I chose certain set depending on the availability of data and the ones that after discussing with professor and the teaching staff, which best could be the good predictors. So my independent variables are agricultural land, air transport, CO2 emissions, labor force participation, manufacturing, taxation, etc. And then the dependent variables are GDP and GNI, and some per capita. Modeling wise, I have done multivariate linear regression, auto-ARIMA with external regressors, and dynamic factor model. I'll show you in a bit as to what I have done. So coming to the Jupyter notebook, I have performed this entire experiment in Python. While I could have chosen R, I'm well versed in Python and hence the choice. All the imports, as you can see over here, reading the data set, performing all the data cleaning and pre-processing steps that we just discussed. And then having done that, I chose to start with a very specific country to gauge the entire data set, look at how it is. So I chose India and just chose GDP as the dependent variable and clean fuel and manufacturing as the independent variables to see if they are significant predictors. And upon doing simple multivariate linear regression, I got a good adjusted R-squares of 0.972, and all the variables were statistically significant and the model itself. So it yields that these indicators can be statistically significant and more comprehensive analysis is warranted. So then having done that, the prune data that I just showed you in the PPT was loaded, performing the cleaning processing steps again, making sure I also add a growth column and trying to see how GDP as a whole column versus using GDP as a growth column affects my results. So I won't go through topics I've already touched in the PPT. And having done these, I straight jump to linear regression. So at the beginning, for the chosen feature subset or the predictor variable subset, I performed multivariate linear regression for all countries for all of these variables to understand which of these are significant. So upon doing so, you realize that some variables like air freight, some like international taxation, and some others like labor force participation looks significant, some others don't. So then dropping the insignificant variables, you rerun the linear regression models. One thing that was very uh, properly realized was that adding country as a categorical did help the cause. It increased the adjusted R square to 0.98. Overall, the the probability is significant for the model, and the overall variables, a lot of them become highly significant. And then, of course, choosing the ones that are that have the least p-value for subsequent analysis. I tried using growth, GDP growth, as a predictor, and also tried to use growth as the independent variables, but it seemed to lower the adjusted R square, and hence I stick to the original values itself. So some out of some results out of these linear regression analysis makes it clear that country is a very significant predictor, especially for Japan and United States. Year is not very statistical significant, and we need to drop certain features like agricultural land, consumer price inflation, and taxes because they are not insignificant. But international taxation, custom duties, labor force participation, air freight, and CO2 emissions are significant variables. So then let me straight jump to the next model that I have done. You can go through in detail, but then when I come next to the predictions that I have done for this linear regression, so you realize that overall it is able to fit well for most countries. For some countries, there are deviations where we realize that there may be regional factors that affect those countries, and they would need to be taken into account in future scope. There are some unusual spikes and drops observed just by the inherent nature of the model, and then at some places perhaps due to COVID in 2021, where the pandemic was hit and it expected a drop. The real drop sometimes are less or more profound than the original, and certain outliers are observed, of course. So performing AutoArima, it's realized that AutoArima is a good model for prediction. It allows you to do good time series forecasting. The predictions are well within the range of the 95% confidence interval, but it is not able to capture some internal dips or rises that we could have wanted to. So these are the standard residuals, quartiles, parallelograms for the AutoArima model. Then the next I choose to look at the dynamic factor model, choosing the 4 statistically significant predictor variables. And the dynamic factor model, in fact, has a lower AIC than the other models. So the AIC for the dynamic factor model is much lower than the AutoArima model, making it more significant for predictions. These are the coefficient of determinations. And then I have done AutoArima with external regressors. Does seem to improve the model by a little bit. So this is the set of analysis that I have done. And then I have repeated the similar set of analysis with the Quad Alliance. The earlier one was G20, this is Quad. So I won't jump into the analysis because it's the similar one, and I have the report on the Jupyter notebook that you can go through in detail to understand the steps that I have done. But one thing that we realized that for Germany, the simple multivariate linear regression model fits very well, captures the rises, drops pretty accurately. I was pleasantly surprised by this. Other things are similar to the analysis done for the G20 countries. Coming back to the presentation, I have just shown you the results for multivariate linear regression model. I've summarized the adjusted R squares for both G20 and Quad, the AutoArima results for USA and Germany, and then the dynamic factor models for USA and Germany. So inferences are, as I said, we need to look at some regional diversity specific, geography specific factors for some countries. statistically insignificant variables were dropped. And then there were some, as I said, like international taxation, labor force participation, air flight, very good high frequency indicators, and CO2 emissions as significant predictors. Dynamic factor models seem to do a better job than AutoArima, but both seem to be good for time series forecasting. Country is a significant predictor, especially for Japan and United States. Challenges, lack of data is a challenge. Misrepresentation of data by some countries is possible due to non-standard qualitative method of gauging these data points. Issues specific to the country and sharp drop in these high frequency indicators due to COVID pandemic were some of the challenges faced. Finally, for future scope, more models, more ARIMA models, GMM profit can be explored. PCA for feature selection can be explored. I had lack of time and couldn't get to it. Expanding the scope of data and choosing some other dependent variables. Here are the reference links that I used. And before I close, I thank Professor William and Hannah from the teaching staff for their valuable inputs and steadfast support throughout this project. Thank you, and I hope this project has been insightful. I look forward to keep learning.